Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I am Amanda Laden, the host of Period to Pause, where we talk about everything from period to menopause and everything in between. I'm super excited to be with you today to really talk about a topic that we need to get into the mainstream. And I'm also here with Cynthia Davis. Cynthia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here. And just made it on time. I've been running around today, so a little bit flustered, hot flash and everything. So I'm in the right place for the menopause conversation. But I'm Cynthia Davis, and I'm the founder and CEO of Diversifying Group. And also we host an amazing podcast called You Can't Say Anything Anymore. So delighted to be here today.
Speaking of You Can't Say Anything Anymore, we're talking about menopause, this thing that was taboo for so long in our society. And finally, I mean, at least in the UK, Sin, like you're starting to talk about it more than we are here in the United States. Why does this matter to you? And I'd love to share why it matters to me too.
Yeah, you know what? I think if we maybe rewind maybe 5 years ago, I think just mentioning menopause, people were very uncomfortable and just didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to know. And I probably was one of those people, if I'm being honest, that didn't really know much about the menopause because I didn't think it really impacted me until it hit me. And I started peri about 3 years ago. Then I became interested. And I think I'm probably one of the luckier people that started going through peri at a time that the world's starting to talk about it. So there were more conversations happening, and I started feeling like, oh, okay, this is a little bit similar to what I'm experiencing. This is a little bit similar to what I'm experiencing. So I think in the UK, more and more people are now starting to have conversations around the menopause and perimenopause. And I think even organizations are now starting to have things like menopause policies, which a lot of organizations 2 years ago would not have even thought of anything like that. So I think the needle is moving, and I think people are being brave and courageous and telling their stories. And I think the more and more people that are coming forward and being open and honest about the menopause and their experiences is allowing for some of this flow of conversation to happen and some of this action to then start to follow that through as well. What's it been like in the States?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like we're so far behind sometimes in terms of the things that we're discussing. I'm very heartened by the conversations that are happening in the public domain of women and people who are gender nonconforming, who are going through menopause or having periods or other issues in the workplace, who are saying, hang on, where is the support that I need? Some of you who are listening to this may be tuning in from places elsewhere in the world. And what you may or may not be aware of is that in America, we still don't have basic rights or policies such as paid parental leave. So we're so far behind when it comes to actually putting in policies and procedures in place. However, there are organizations out there, a few, some biotech and pharma companies and other organizations that are saying, we're looking at our population and we have roughly 20% of our population who's going through menopause right now. What are we going to do about it? And how can we support them, particularly to stay in the workplace? So I'm just happy that we have this platform to share our personal stories, to talk to some experts today, and also to say, how can we start to take steps to meaningfully support people who are experiencing these things and to provide a safe space, a psychologically safe space to have these conversations.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And it kind of, one of the things that you touched on there, Amanda, especially around the workplace, and there was, and I kind of saved this because I kind of wanted to mention it because I think it's really, really important. But there was a survey that was actually done in 2019 by the Chartered Institute for Personal Development. So it's called the CIPD here in the UK. And as somebody that also works within the work environment, working within diversity and inclusion, I found this stat to be absolutely staggering. And I'm just going to read it out because I think it's really, really important. But it was a survey that they conducted in 2019, which found that 3 in 5 menopausal women, usually aged between 45 and 55, were negatively affected at work. And almost 900,000 women in the UK actually left their jobs over an unidentified kind of period of time because of menopausal symptoms. So for me, if we're taking that age group of sort of between the 45 and 55, this is when women are really at the peak of their careers. They're starting to be in some of those leadership kind of roles, managerial kind of roles. And if we're losing that talent at that time, that is, from a business perspective, is shocking. So I think, so important that we're having this conversation and we are showing, I suppose, the impact that it has when this is not taken seriously, and the impact it can have on organizations and on the economy as a whole, really, if you are losing that amount of talent, in the workforce.
Absolutely. And I think it's something, that business case piece is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart when we work with our clients and when we also talk about the landscape of, particularly here in America, what's happening with people's rights as it comes, across a broad spectrum of things, and how that's going to impact them in the workplace. And now you couple this with, as you say, people in the prime and in the peak of their careers, and how do we step in to meaningfully create some change? And each of us, and those of you who are listening to this podcast or watching this live stream right now, each of us have a part to play in that and in taking action. And I know as we dig into this conversation today with Jay and Clarissa, our two experts, we're going to be talking a little bit more about that and what that means for all of us when it comes to our careers, our business growth, the economic impact on society, on governments, on organizations. So, those are really, really valid points, Cynthia.
Yeah, and I think, as I said at the start of this conversation, it's something that I didn't realize, to what extent the problem was in organizations not taking this seriously. So things like the policy, the fact that only recently we've had something in the UK, which is a pledge that organizations are now taking to make sure they have things like the menopause policy. But for years, women have been in the workforce where they've had no support. They've not even been able to talk about the fact that they're going through this. And, they've not even been able to, talk about why they're feeling the way that they are. So for me, I know the times when I've had really difficult times with perimenopause where, I've been in a meeting and all of a sudden I'm having a hot flash and, you try and kind of sit there and you can see, and it's, at first I used to feel quite embarrassed to kind of say I was having a hot flash. And then I thought, hang on a minute, no, because I'm, as a senior leader, if I can't lead by example and say the reason I'm looking hot and sweaty is because I'm having a hot flush, because I'm going through perimenopause, then it just means I'm no better. So this is the part that we all have to play around calling it out. And that was, I suppose, a turning point for me to see the impact that we all can have, how we can all stand up and talk about it. And I think when people start to see people in leadership or senior roles being very open and talking about this, it starts to make it okay and start to normalize it. So I've stopped hiding the fact that, or making excuses of why I'm sweating or why I'm having a hot flash or why I need, a glass of water in meetings. I will say it, and it's not anything to be shameful about or to be ashamed to say. So I think it's really, how can we be a bit more brave in our work environments to talk about these things? But if you're somebody who's going through that and you're experiencing it, it's, what can you do to talk to your organization to say, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm going through, and not be afraid to ask for the help or for reasonable adjustments to be made in your working pattern. But sometimes it's really difficult to ask that if you're not in an environment that's very inclusive or supportive. So I think it's really interesting, and I'd love to hear around, and I know we've got a couple of experts who will be joining us to just hear what organizations can do to support people who are experiencing that. And it's easy for me because I run my own business and therefore I can be that open, that up, up front. But for other people who are in different environments, what can they do, and what should organizations be doing to support those individuals during that period?
Yeah, and I think that's such a rich conversation. I don't know if we want to bring Jay and Clarissa in to start weighing in on all of this, especially with their work in organizations.
I think it's perfect time to bring them in. I can see they've just joined us on screen.
Welcome, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Clarissa. Hi, Jay.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for inviting us to, share and have this conversation with you and with the audience about such an important topic.
It's a pleasure to have you both. It'll be great for the audience, I suppose, to maybe just find out a little bit about each of you, and if you're able to just give a quick intro and what you each do.
Sure. I'm Clarissa Kristjansson. I'm a menopause holistic consultant and educator. I was a former corporate employee for 35 years. I'm the host of the Thriving Through Menopause podcast. And I'm proudly postmenopausal, but still very passionate about it.
And I am Jay Pryor, and I am a speaker, author, executive coach, trainer, and I am a non-binary human that was assigned female at birth. And I think it's important to say that I went on testosterone I was on testosterone for 18 years, which shut down, but I kept all of my female parts because I've always identified as a non-binary human. I went off testosterone and I've been off for 5 years. So I coach women exclusively between the ages of 45 and 60 and have for a long time. And part of that is because of the shock I got when I transitioned and was handed white male privilege overnight. But the other piece of it is that I'm real clear about two things. One is the difference that I get treated as a masculine or man presenting human in the workforce versus a woman. But the other, and now we're talking about stuff that in terms of this menopause, I am physically now I am a 56-year-old female-bodied human that has all of my female plumbing, and I am in perimenopause. If I make it till February, I'll be in full-on menopause. And the thing that's so important for me about this, and why I'm always want to be an advocate for people who are assigned female at birth, and especially classically trained female, and identify as women, I coach and empower those women exclusively, mostly because of things like this, where my experience is that, we don't know anything about women's bodies. When I went off testosterone, I was told my ovaries were already atrophied. I'd already been through menopause. I started my period within 2 months. I had a regular period for 2 years, then I went through menopause. So I've been through menopause twice, or I'm almost there, right? And so it's important for me more than anything to be somebody who represents someone who doesn't look like a woman or present as feminine, to have this conversation, because it's not just people identify as women that need gynecological care and that have these conversations, but also it's important for me to just validate and continue to validate this experience and how intense hormones can be, because I've lived it all in terms of that, off on testosterone, all of it. and it's just really, there's a lot of power in those hormones. And so I think it's important that we have these conversations, and I'm so grateful that we're doing that. So I apologize for the long introduction, but thanks for having me here.
Thank you. So I'd love to talk a little bit about misconceptions. Clarissa, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you think there are some misconceptions around menopause that are holding progress back?
It depends how long we've got, of course.
But all day.
But all things. I think that if I had to, in the instance of the time we have here, I'd probably draw attention to 3 of them. The first one is definitively the misconception around age, because however you gender identify, there are millions, if not 1 billion plus women who are told you particularly are too young to be in menopause. And we know that's not true. Or similarly, we see in great campaigns, and there was a really great one done for the Mayor of London, fantastic campaign. And then they represented women who looked older than me, and I'm like, what are you talking about? So this continual sort of misunderstanding means that not only are we not maybe picking up those people in the workforce, we're seeing women who, and other people who are 43, 44, which is now much more common to become perimenopausal, which for the audience, if they're not aware, is this start of the hormone roller coaster, then that is happening commonly, but not always, in early 40s. Obviously, there are people who have surgical, chemical, genetic menopause, and they can be any age. I've had people on my podcast who were 20 and went into perimenopause. And then what we're also seeing is when you seek help from your clinician, you're being rebuffed. And you're one of the 75% of people who just get told, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not old enough, go away. And then you're navigating this journey entirely on your own. And that doesn't matter really very much where you happen to live in the world. So that's the first really big misconception. I think the second one is about symptoms, because yes, hot flashes are the most prevalent, and weight gain, but it's the psychological aspects that are really impacting the quality of people's lives. Individuals will each have our own experience, because each of us is made up from all sorts of places you come to, because, you've had a history and you've got a mind that constructs it to be however it is. But the common symptoms will be more likely that affect the quality of your life: anxiety, depression, insomnia, fatigue. And we're still seeing the latest updated guidelines where I live here in Sweden not acknowledging any mental health, which is quite shocking for one of the world's psychotherapy nuts countries, quite frankly. And I might just say also this lack of gender identity, which I'm sure Jay is going to take up and take a lot further. But also, I would say a lot of misconceptions around how different ethnicities and different groups experience perimenopause and menopause. So I think we forget that people who are neurodivergent have severe psychological mental disorders, have experienced extreme childhood and other traumas, maybe are disabled. The list is very long. We're even getting whole swathes of women now in the global south who are HIV positive and menopausal. We have no idea on the whole. There's maybe one or two clinicians in the world who know how to approach that. So the fact is that we are sitting here really looking too much through the lens of white, Western, dare I say, slightly overprivileged people. And we are not really yet in a situation where we are embracing, and therefore we get statements, as I saw on LinkedIn, that Asian women don't have perimenopause symptoms. And there is a study that shows that they may have less hot flushes, but that's to do with a high isoflavone diet linked to soy. But let me tell you, having run 2 workshops in Southeast Asia with a Malaysian doctor and a business leader, they definitely had a lot of symptoms. Maybe they're not as able to talk about them. We'll come back to that conversation. But those are some of my big misconceptions that mean we are not fully talking to the world. We certainly haven't really had World Menopause Month in my mind, but we are also leaving a lot of people without the help and support or the ability to ask for it.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for sharing all that. Cynthia, I might turn it over to you to see what's on your mind with what was just said.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. And I think one of the things that you touched on there, Clarissa, is especially the age thing for me. And I think a lot of women who start experiencing some of those symptoms will go to their GP or their doctor to say, here's what I'm experiencing. But because they're not the 45, 50 age category, are then pushed back. And I've had friends, come to me crying, saying, I think I'm going through it. These are the symptoms I'm having, but my doctor's not taking it seriously. I need to do something, and, in desperate need. So my question is, what can we do when we know what we're going through? We know our bodies, we know what we're experiencing. And when we are seeking that help and advice from medical professionals to say, right, here's what I'm experiencing, what advice can any of the panel kind of give to anyone experiencing that? Because it's something that I've I know I've experienced, when I first had a conversation with a GP, and the first thing they said, well, you're not really around the perimenopausal kind of age because you're only in your early 40s. And at the time I was kind of like 42, and I was like, yeah, but so I think there's this whole myth that we need to, but what can we do when we know what we're experiencing? We know our bodies, we can see the change. What can we do? And I'm sure there'll be people that are tuning in on this that would just want to find out what they can do, because they're probably at the end of their tether as well and frustrated.
Jay?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind, because I'd rather, of course, you've probably got a better answer than I do, because my answer is the same answer that I have that I give to trans people, which is don't stop until you get the service you deserve, and believe me, I am someone who has had to call multiple doctors to just have them even work with me, because as soon as I say the word I'm trans, they don't want to talk to me anymore. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, sometimes it takes advocating yourself. They're saying to move my microphone some way. I don't know. I'm hearing that, seeing that. I don't know if they can't hear me. Anyway.
You're hitting, like, it's a little just scratchy.
Okay.
If you just pull it a little bit.
Okay. That make it better?
Yeah.
Okay. So my point is that the hard part for me about saying that is, again, the same thing that it's hard for me when I'm speaking to trans folks is I have a lot of privilege, right? So it's easy for me to say, keep advocating for yourself, right? Keep doing that. Because not everybody has my confidence. Not everybody has my FU attitude. Not everybody is able to advocate for themselves they don't have the privilege I have. And so that's the difficult piece. And so, what I encourage people to do is to find people who will advocate for you, find people who, like trans kids, I go with them to appointments, to gynecological appointments. I've done it. And so, if you can find someone to advocate for you, if you can't do it for yourself, what I was going to ask Clarissa, and I don't know because you're not in the States, and Amanda, you may know this. What I don't know is, like, are there organizations that help you and support you around this? That's why I wanted you to answer, Clarissa, because I think you have more answers than I do. I'm more like, stick up for yourself. So, yeah.
So let me say that I have 3 pieces of advice. I think the first thing is we have to track what's going on ourselves. There is no test, and I am adamant. I don't care how many functional doctors want to sell you a Dutch test. It is not a definitive test for perimenopause. And that is, I have that from the authority of some of the biggest reproductive scientists in the world, and this does not work. So you have to start to keep a record of your symptoms. And those are the things you have to take, even if you have to take paper and pen into the doctor's office and say, I have symptoms X, Y, and Z. Now, you're right, Jay, that if we are able to advocate and speak for ourselves, that's much easier. I think the UK, that we've had great things like the positivity process posters. There's also been Let's Talk Menopause happening in the US too, which is opening up support and advice of things that you can raise. My second thing is, if you are in a country like the US and the UK where there are guidelines from the Menopause Society, print them out, and when you are rebuffed, point to them and say, this is what is written in the NICE, or that you have to speak at, you have to show this. And the third one is, change doctor if you don't get an answer. Do not stay with someone who is gaslighting you and ignoring you. It is your right to do that. It's not easy. And I think that the biggest support is for people who are socially disadvantaged, to have no one to speak to. These are still the forgotten group. I mean, I take my hat off to Elizabeth and Claire for making those posters in doctors' surgeries, in Urdu, in Hindi, in Arabic, in all the posters. So at least somebody can read them and think, oh, I wonder if that's me. But we are a very long way from everybody being advocates. So I think we have to do the best we can. And I think we have to have more organizations that still aren't yet formed to be able to support those who cannot have a voice. And I think they have not a voice in other places, and they don't trust authority.
So I thank you for sharing that. And I'll say here, over here at Period to Pause, one of the things we're doing is trying to provide guides, guidebooks, resources for all people who are going through different health issues. And, here in the United States, our health system is, I don't know what term to use without cursing right now, is really not set up for access and equity, right? And so, as you're saying, Clarissa, we have kind of underserved, underrepresented communities that really cannot get the support they need. And so part of that is, how do we help them to navigate a system that wasn't set up for them in the first place? What I want folks to hear is that you do have a voice. And even if the medical system isn't necessarily serving you right now, there are avenues you can pursue to get the healthcare you need. And I'm sitting here as a educated, privileged white woman who went through 20 years of misdiagnosis here in the United States, to the point where then ultimately I had to have a hysterectomy, which put me automatically into perimenopause. And I'm still not getting the information I need to be able to manage my own healthcare. So I know those are some great tips and advice, and we don't have all of the answers today. However, I think one of the positive things is that we're having this conversation so that hopefully folks can say, that's me. And maybe there is a resource out there, whether it's, a menopausal organization or somewhere else you can go to get some tools and tips that you might need to help you to be able to manage everything you're going through. And I would also say, I'm very kind of excited about the UK and some other countries paving the way to have these conversations. And whether it takes celebrities or other voices to get into that mix, it's moving in the right direction so that we can stop the stigma that is so attached to everything with women and gender nonconforming healthcare. On that note, I'd love to talk a little bit more about intersectionality and gender identity and expression. Jay, I don't know if you can talk a little bit more about your lived experience, particularly when it comes to corporate, whether that be, corporate globally, and some things that perhaps those leaders and organizations need to be thinking about when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is that this has to be is that gender equity is a topic, right? Gender equity is something that everyone says that they're focused on. And then when we have these kind of conversations, they're like, what? Right? That's how it occurs, right? That's how it occurs. It's like, we're going to have gender equity as long as you don't make us talk about periods or menopause or any of that stuff, because that makes us white guys at the top uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So I think that part of this is the delightful piece is that there is a movement towards gender equity. There is a diversity and equity and inclusion movement that is happening. And I think as we speak, it is also evolving. I think there's a lot of people have been paying lip service, diversity and equity inclusion. And so there's a lot of retooling. Like there's people who are figuring that out. And then, there's a lot that's happening right now. And my personal experience is that I don't see much happening in the world of having conversations about menopause or creating spaces and or I mean physical spaces, but I also mean cultural spaces for women to have and for women or female-bodied humans or humans that are experiencing menopause. And being able to have these conversations out loud, especially, as Clarissa's speaking about the symptoms, I coach women exclusively. And so there's so many times that we've been in a conversation where we are dealing with the depression that's come up, or we're dealing with anxiety that's come up. And it always ends up being usually a menopausal conversation, right? And in the workplace, they don't have anybody to talk to or to access that, right? So I think that it's really cool that in the world of corporate and even in small business, even as we build buildings now, I have a nephew who's a contractor in a building. He builds buildings, and he's a we're from Kansas, folks, so you got to remember that we're a little country. And so, my nephew calls them cry rooms. That they put in cry rooms in the corporate buildings because they're actually instituting rooms where people can go and have their emotional self, right? And so, and he's talking about people having the younger generation having meltdowns, but if we're already creating a gentler conversation around that, right? We're creating these rooms in places where people can go meditate, take a break, get themselves emotionally centered. But so far, that has been around the younger generation and what they need coming into the workplace. And so, what I'm always trying to do is to have us remember that we have a ton of people in the workforce right now that as the boomers start to get up and out, there's still these tons of the Gen Xers are just there and they're just starting into that piece. So we have a ton of people in the workforce that we also need to keep our focus on. So when I'm working inside of culture, one of the things I do is try to make sure that every voice gets brought to the table. And sometimes usually that there's this, it's the humans going through menopause that aren't speaking up and that aren't making sure their needs are met. And so part of it is not just advocating for yourself in the medical world, but it's also about trying to figure out and navigate and advocate for yourself inside of business and inside of your ERG groups and inside of, having a conversation for creating space for you to be able to handle your wellness, all of your wellness, so that you can be the most powerful leader that you can be, which is my whole piece is that, my whole thing is creating conscious leaders, right? So I want to create leaders who are conscious that you have a power within you, right? And this physical thing that happens to you sometimes can get in the way of that, right? And so in this age, and we're the most powerful we are, right? This is where finally we stop giving a shit. Who cares what we think about ourselves and our bodies? And we're going to kick ass, right? And then the hormones kick in. It's like, what? I can't stop sweating. So I love what Sen said, because I do the same thing. I step on stage, and one of the first things I tell people is this is a female-bodied human in perimenopause. I break out in a sweat. Don't worry. It's okay. It's happening. And I want to make sure they know about this because, for me, being out and talking about this is also just, I want to expand this conversation and let's stop being afraid of it. So my bottom line, Amanda, is I don't see they're doing a lot. and I see room for it, right? I see space for it. I see a softening in everywhere around business and corporate. And I'm always coming from that place of be your higher self and be your love self. And so for companies that I work with, they're already in that conversation. But I really do see a softening inside of corporate and inside of business. And so I think that there's room for this conversation.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Cynthia and Clarissa, what are you seeing that organizations are doing that's giving you hope around, creating some of this gender equity and health equity and creating space for the conversations? I mentioned a few organizations here in the US that I'm starting to see in the public domain. However, I think you're more at the forefront of this. So I'm just curious to see, and maybe Cynthia, with some of your clients or something, what are you seeing that's allowing this conversation to exist?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest shift has been in people coming forward and talking about it. And I think you touched a little bit on this, Amanda, when you talked around in the UK, we have some really high profile celebrities who've come forward and talking about their experiences. And I think that's lent a brilliant voice to the cause, where now it's no longer just, Jane from accounts who's got menopause. It's like, hang on a minute, this A-list celebrities going through this. This is interesting. This is different. And I think the more we're seeing people talking about it in these really high places and open places, that's making the business world take it seriously and think, hang on a minute, we've got other people in the business that are similar kind of age. What are we doing to support them? So I think this is where the movement has had a lot more focus on it, because high profile individuals in the UK, people like Davina McCall, we've seen have been doing documentaries on Channel 4, and it's been in the mainstream media. We've got, some high profile celebrities, who are now using their voice and their platforms to really showcase and talk about it, and be very open, and, wearing their patches with pride, and, no longer having to hide that. And I think that's got the conversation moving from it being out in the public domain into the workforce. So organizations have now had to respond to think, okay, what can we do as an organization to support this group of people who are going through or will eventually go through it? And where it's, I've been disheartened to hear a friend of mine saying in her organization, they said, well, the population of the company is a lot of women under the age of 30. So we're not going to focus on it right now. We're still trying to talk about gender equality. We're still trying to talk about ethnicity. And it's like, this shouldn't be in isolation. If you are talking about true inclusion, that includes everybody. At some point, those 20, 30-something-year-old individuals will become in their 40s, will become in their 50s. And as we know, menopause doesn't only start when women are in their 50s or 60s, as we've been taught and told. So I think now, more than ever, organizations are starting to take this seriously. It's now being led by the voice of the people to say, what support do you have in place? What policy do you have in place? And, we're seeing more and more companies coming to us and asking us advice around, right, we need to put together a menopause kind of policy. What should we be doing? What should we be considering? And that's really, really encouraging, because for so long that was always, pushed to the wayside. But I think for me, it's when, you are in an organization, is speak up and ask your HR department and say, what policy do you have for when people are going through the menopause, and call it out. And I think, Jay, you talk so eloquently around the point around calling it out and speaking out, because unless we do that and we call our organizations to account, no one's going to do it for us. So we've got to be the brave ones that step forward and ask for it. You don't ask, you don't get, right? So ask and say, right, do we have a menopause policy in place? If not, why not? And it doesn't cost the organization anything at all to put one in place. So this is where sometimes that brush off, or, well, it's too expensive, or, HR have a role to play in terms of looking after the well-being of the employees. This falls within the remit of looking after your employees and their well-being. So if people are not looked after when they are experiencing menopausal kind of challenges or going through things like brain fog or whatever it is, and they're not supported in the right kind of way, that will have an impact on how they perform in the workplace. So it is important that organizations start to look at how can they put in place reasonable adjustments to facilitate and provide when people do require those kind of provisions. So I think it's more important now that organizations are taking it seriously. And the pledge that we've got here in the UK, we've had over 600 organizations sign up to take that pledge to make sure there is a menopause policy. We want to move it from 600. Next year, we want to be saying there's 6,000. In 5 years' time, we want to be saying there's 60,000. That's when we know we're moving the needle forward. But it starts with each organization taking on themselves to say, right, we need to do this. How can we do it? And there's so much public information out there around how to implement a menopause policy. If your organization hasn't got one, print one off. There's so many, the menopause charity have got a template that you can print off, take it to your HR team and demand for them to have one in place that supports the well-being of the employees when they are experiencing that. So I think it's on us if we want to do it, because sometimes we know with organizations, unless they have to do it, sometimes they won't willingly do it because it's the nice thing to do. We have to speak up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. Clarissa, what do you think's the biggest thing you want organizations to hear when it comes to healthcare around menopause?
I think that they need to be supporting. I think they need to have an understanding that this is happening, that they have a role to play in supporting women's health and well-being, that they don't need to become experts. I think that when this started out as some sort of training, there was a lot of pushback saying this doesn't belong in the workplace. I don't want to know about this. So I think that a lot of really good organizations who do menopause training in the UK, and that is light years ahead of what anything I'm seeing in Europe or Australia or the US, are coming in and they're giving enough facts that people understand what is going on, how they can support employees effectively, but we're not asking them to become experts. So I think that is, and I think in terms of the healthcare, what does that look like? It might be opening up employee assistance programs for someone to talk to. It can be creating flexibility in the work days. I mean, that doesn't work for everybody, okay, all the way down. Having worked in factories, I know that there are women on the line for whom that may not apply. But how do we then provide uniforms, break rooms, water, what people need? And that's part of health and wellness. It isn't all tied up in fancy packages, it's tied up in a lot of practical stuff that makes day-to-day working here more comfortable, more easy, and that there is the support and advice that is going to be there should people wish to tap into it. We don't want to be forcing anyone, but we want them to be able to access that. And it's the duty of an organization to take care of the welfare of its employees in an appropriate way.
Yeah, I liked what you talked about then. I think that there are some easy things that organizations can do. I remember hearing somebody saying in their office, they didn't want to have the women that were going through menopause and having hot flashes in the summer, almost be made to have a fan on the desk so everyone could see that. But they actually had a room that was a cool room where if they were having a hot flash, they could just discreetly go into that room, take their laptop and sit in a much more cooler room than anywhere else. And it's just sometimes the simplest of things like that will help. So you're not making people kind of stand up because they've got that. Sometimes they don't really want to come forward and be that open. It's for us, I don't mind calling out, but there are other people that might not feel as comfortable doing that. So it's providing that support and that access where they can still have support in a discreet and respectful kind of way as well. Another one is, we within my own workforce, we've got a WhatsApp group that we set up just to support the women that are going through that. And we just share tips on, could be things like, I've started taking this, black kosher or something. Have you tried it? Or I've started taking this particular, vitamin. I found it really helped me. Or I've started taking B12 or, we just share tips. It's little simple things like that, you've got others that can support and experience, and it's open to anyone. It doesn't have to be anyone that's going through the menopause. And I think it's also, we encourage other people that might have friends or family that are going through that to also be part of that group where they can learn something. So if your friend or your mum or your partner or somebody that starts going through that, you're able to also support and advice because you've been part of that. So you don't always have to be going through it to be able to be involved, but also be able to understand and know how to support.
Yeah, it's amazing to me sometimes that organizations think they have to immediately go to a solution without talking to their folks first. And so, one of the things we sometimes say with our clients or even those organizations we're around is, well, have you had the conversation yet? And if you don't know how to have the conversation, bring in us or another organization that can facilitate that for you so that you're getting the information you need, again, in a safe space to be able to support your people, whether it's creating a cool room, whether it's creating flexible working hours, whether it's creating plans for your, women who are on the line in the factories, Clarissa, like you pointed out. But sometimes it can just start with a simple conversation. And it surprises me still to this day that organizations aren't even doing that.
No. And creating a safe space, as you said, Cynthia, where people can talk, whether that is physical or virtual, is incredibly important. And I think a place where hierarchy is stripped away. And sometimes, and I love the concept of these menopause cafes that start in the UK and have rolled out into other countries. People can come together, have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee. You leave, whether you're CEO, whatever, at the door, and there are no experts in the room trying to tell you and steer you. It is a person-to-person conversation. Any gender is welcome, and what's said in the room stays in the room. And I think when organizations can also do that, both it's a safe space, it's green space where we can talk and know that we can say anything we like, and also maybe ideas are come up that can be used constructively because you're actually tuning into what people may want or what's coming up as a bugbear for them, but done with respect to the people that are there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've seen, Sin, I don't know if you want to go to, I've seen there's a couple questions coming in, I think from folks looking at the, or on YouTube or wherever they're watching this. There's a couple interesting ones that came in. There's one that said, it's a great thing that organizations are taking notice to menopause, but no one seems to be talking about how to support people who have difficult periods. Given menopause is related to periods, why is this being ignored? Oh my gosh, I feel like that's the $1 million question, because in my circumstance, I'm also, as Cynthia was talking about, in a privileged position in that I own my own business, and the disease I have is called adenomyosis, which is a cousin of endometriosis. So you have really, really extremely painful bad periods, and you bleed through your clothes, and it's embarrassing and horrible and awful. And you're debilitated sometimes. And so, that's one instance of having bad periods, but you're right. Why aren't we talking about this? And I think, Jay, you could also probably speak to this too, as a gender nonconforming human who had to change their tampon in the men's room. Just even basic things where we're not having these conversations, which are important to everyone. Jay, I don't know if you want to speak to that one too.
Yeah, that's part of the thing one of the things that I want to make sure we always talk about is how none of these conversations are in a vacuum, and how they all intersect with each other. And transgender equity and gender equity are and sexism, that whole conversation, right? They're all meshed in together. And so part of what companies should be doing it seems like this should be a no-brainer by now, are making gender neutral bathrooms, but in the States, we're still so far behind in that. So there's all this separation, right? And so if you have a body like mine and you're having a period, most of them, they're not going to have these products in the men's room. Mm-hmm. And so it's literally getting down to basic, which are, that when it comes to problems, there's your technical issues and your adaptive issues, right? And your technical issues should be easy. Just like Cynthia said, it's easy. Create a policy. It's easy. Put a sign on the door that says gender neutral or all are welcome or anything, put products for both, for all genders in all the bathrooms, right? These are really easy technical solutions that are not hard at all, right? And that not just for people like me, if I walk into a restroom and there's, first of all, I'm welcome there for all genders, and then all products are there, and I see everybody's, they're providing all this stuff. I feel safe. I feel taken care of. I feel nurtured. And if a cisgender man walks into a men's room and sees feminine products, then we get to have a conversation. And I think that is more important than anything else, that we stop, I don't know how to do this, because it's my whole lifetime I've been working on this, which is to try to just shift the tide of classic training and how we talk about women's bodies from the jump, right? I'm also the host of the Gender Reveal Party podcast, and we have these conversations because the minute it's in the womb and they find out what sex it is, that we start talking about it in a particular way. We start treating that little human in a particular way, and then we talk about its body in a particular way. So by the time that child is 4, they're already like consumed with body image crap, so it's all of that is like, this could be so simple, right? But we have to start with those technical issues first. And then those bring up adaptive issues, which are the human training that we have and all the way we've been trained to talk about. And men have been trained, cisgender men who have been classically trained men have been trained that women's bodies are not their job. They don't need to talk about it. They don't need to think about it. They'll close their ears if you say the word period. They'll go la 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 la. Right? They don't want to hear it. That's everywhere in the media. Like, we act like it's something they should not know about, right? And gosh, wouldn't it be amazing if like men actually had conversations about the impact of menopause on the workforce. I mean, it would be a miracle. So for me, it's like it starts with the technical issues, moves into the adaptive issues, but boy, do we have them all. And my experience as a masculine presenting human in the world, boy, could we use some just common sense, really, but also just some acceptance and real inclusion, because until you have feminine products in the men's room, you're not practicing inclusion. As far as I'm concerned, right? So put that on a stamp.
I think if I could wave a magic wand right now, it would be to give everybody in America common sense.
It'll start with common decency.
No, it's quite interesting because to your point, there's been some amazing questions coming here, and I'd love the opportunity to kind of ask a few of them if we've got time. But one of them, and it's something that I've kind of known, especially around that kind of community bit and intersectionality, is there's still stigma in certain kind of communities around talking about, as they kind of call it, women's problems or women's issues. And how do we overcome that? And especially I come from an African background, so it was always instilled from a very young age. I think, Jay, you talked a lot around from when people are very young, certain things that are kind of instilled in them. And, within my culture, it was very much that we didn't really talk about these women's issues. It was always behind closed doors. Nobody knew you were having a period. Nobody ever knew you were having a period or when you were having a period. So there's still all these things that we're almost having to undo and unlearn that been so drilled in us from, day one up until, the time that we get into our adulthood. How do we start to have those conversations within communities? And I think, Clarissa, you talked a little around the kind of Asian communities and some of the stigma there. Has anyone got any tips or advice around how we start having, because a lot of this is also generational kind of challenges that we are almost also having to overcome, because different generations were not as open to talk about these things as we are. So what do we do to help break some of that stigma in certain communities?
I think I would say grassroots campaigns are really where it's at. One of the most impressive grassroots campaigns I've seen come up, and they've started in 2022, is Menopause Uganda. Now, they are a phenomenal group of women. They are going out on the street. They are running amazing educational places all over Uganda. They are engaging men in their conversations, in their protests. It is an incredible example of people coming together and saying, we're not waiting for government or policy or business. We, a small group, are going to do this. And I know that they have received threats and harassments and all sorts of things, unfortunately, but they are very committed. And I see that also in places like Nepal, Indonesia, other parts of Southeast Asia, that it really is small groups of very proactive people, sometimes led by a healthcare worker in the first instance, not necessarily a doctor, but they have enough knowledge to begin to pull together to really just community build, because it's a big job to go from the top down. I mean, it's just too hard. And there are huge cultural barriers in places like, for example, in India. And that. But once the momentum builds, and I think India is a good example where momentum is building, then we've seen that menopause got talked about in Bombay Begums, which is a big popular soap opera. Now there are adverts coming. So I think it begins in grassroots, in passionate people who eventually kind of both trickle up and trickle down. And it's not a quick fix. I don't think there's going to be the UK Davina McCall everywhere kind of thing, because there's so much cultural taboo that we're working through that starts at menstruation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And thank you for that overview. And I think it's something that I think more and more people being brave and courageous to have some of these conversations that will help get that kind of message across. Yeah, there's just one other kind of question in here that I kind of wanted to ask, and it kind of more supposed to ask to each of you is what's something that you've learned about yourself through menopause or perimenopause, and it's, you know, we've all kind of talked about our lived experience, and you know, we all experience menopause very differently, and go through it in different kind of ways. But it would be interesting just to get, you know, gauge from all of you just around, you know, one thing that you've learned about yourselves going through the menopause. Who would like to take that one first?
I'm happy to take it.
Do you want to take it, Amanda? Go for it.
Yeah. So I'm in perimenopause. Just recently got diagnosed, even though I was fighting with my doctor to diagnose me and do my blood work. I think the one thing that I'm learning is that there's always so much to learn, and that, you know, our bodies are not monoliths. And so one thing that works for one person with female body parts going through this is not the same thing that's going to work for somebody else. And so as much as I feel like I'm a fierce advocate for myself, I'm still learning that I have to use my voice, be firm about it, and advocate, and keep advocating and keep advocating and keep telling them what I need. So that's kind of my biggest ongoing lesson as I'm going through this right now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amanda. Clarissa, anything that you've learned?
I think one of the most important things, I mean, I had my own personal journey, but I think to say that I'm learning the importance of having evidence-based information. We're living, it's a wild west out there. Women are incredibly confused. And I feel that part of my role, together with other people that I work with, is to steer a fact-based, calm conversation that may not seem quite as exciting, but actually is giving in people the information they need, and also preventing people from being, quite honestly, exploited by a million products that they don't need to put their hand in their pocket for. So good, simple, fact-based information across the board, whether that's holistic or allopathic approaches.
That's great. Jay, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that the big lesson that I have had, not just from being in perimenopause and having gone in and out of menopause, from being on testosterone and off testosterone. First of all, the power of hormones, like, they are powerful. They have a very powerful impact in your life. And so to deny that is insane. I give myself that they are powerful, right? And so, but the other thing is that for me, my book is called Lean Inside. And for me, everything comes from a place of, you know, really hoping that people take good care of their spirit and themselves and their heart. And so more than anything, what I continue to learn as I traverse through all the different gender identities that I've had is that what's most important is me listening to me. And me being able to be still and take some time to really listen to me and listen to my body, and then be validating of what comes up for me, and then be an advocate for myself. And I know, again, for some people, I have the privilege of doing that. And for some people, that's tough. But as everything I've been through, you know, off testosterone, I had to go off testosterone cold turkey because I was on such a low dose. So I cried for like 6 months going off cold turkey. But so I know that power. And so all along the way, it's like I have to really center in and validate myself, and acknowledge that this is a process that I'm going through. And like every process, I need to be able to nurture myself and find ways that keep me well and centered. And that's my job, right? That's my 100% responsibility. And it's just always reinforced at every step and phase of my life is like, this is a new layer of me learning what works for me, and then being my own advocate to make sure that that really gets taken care of.
Yeah, no, amazing, you know, kind of insight from all of you. And I think one of the things I've learned, you know, myself is just really, you know, and Jay, you touched on this, is just really around taking some time to listen to your body, because I think sometimes when we're all so busy, right, we try and ignore it, we try and power through. And, you know, I used to be that person. I'm like, no, I'm just going to carry on. And I've had to learn that, there are days where I'm going to struggle. There are days that are going to be easier and harder than others. And that's okay, right? And it's being kind to yourself and being honest, because before I'd have to hide the fact that I was struggling, that I was having, I hadn't slept. I'd had like 4 or 5 days in a row where I was just literally couldn't sleep. I was waking up during the night, hot sweats, night sweats, you name it, and just struggling to sleep, and then trying to go and do a 9 to 6 and be on your game, and then you're forgetting words and being hard on yourself. So it's really being kind to ourselves as well, but listening and tuning into our bodies. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've had to learn. And and I've stopped hiding the fact that I'm going through it. So now, if I am taking the time off because I haven't slept, I've got brain fog, I would call it and say exactly what it is. I won't try and pretend, I had a cold or whatever. I will say I was struggling yesterday because the menopause has been kicking me up the backside and I haven't slept for days. And it's just and what I found is people go, oh my God, I experienced that too. And the more we open and honest, you'd be amazed that it's not just you that's going through that. There are other people, and that actually sometimes makes me feel okay and think, oh, thank God it's not just me then that's experienced it like this, because we sometimes feel it's only happening to us because we're always keeping all this to ourselves and we're not talking about, we're not sharing. So sometimes that communication and that awareness and honesty, allows other people to feel like, yeah, actually this happens to all of us. It's not just so and so. So we've all kind of experienced it and experienced in different ways. So I think there's power in all of that. And I'm just conscious of time and kind of just want to give us all one piece of advice that we would love to impart to everyone that's tuned in. If there's one piece of advice that each of you can give before we sum it up, what would that be?
Well, I'll jump in real quick because of something that's on my mind, and this is not really advice about menopause, but one of the things I know that makes the biggest difference is when people are willing to be interrupters. And one of the things we've been talking about is how do we interrupt and reverse this conversation about women's bodies, about menopause, about periods. This idea that it's a curse has been on us forever. Right. And so what I know is that what's powerful is in your daily life, if you're willing to have the guts to ask people to rearrange their conversations or to think differently, people don't even question it because it's just what we know. Right. Mm-hmm. So in my household, for example, one of the worst dirty words you can say is pussy. I'm sorry, that's an offensive word to say here now, but my wife will say, "You wish you were as strong as a female body part like that." Right. Like we don't use that word to mean you're weak. We don't use that word. Right. And when my wife says that, right, then it's like, oh, wait, that's a different way to think. Right. Nobody thinks about that because we just call one way to shame a man is to call him a pussy. Right. So we want to reframe all that and be like, yeah, you wish you were as strong as a woman. Right. We want to, so what my advice is for people to, if you're interested in being a conscious leader, interrupt conversations, be mindful enough to interrupt conversations like this that demean women, that have our bodies be demeaned, that have these processes be demeaned, all of that to instead of celebrating, when you hear that, just call it out. And and I promise you, if you offer another alternative, people they just don't think about it. They just don't know what they're saying. And so one of the ways to shift that tide, same with the trans conversation, when people are making fun of gender, just stop them. Like, it's silly, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you can do this and it's not a big deal. You make people think about it. It's like, oh, okay. So I just wanted to share that. I think that's powerful.
Thank you, Jane.
Amanda? I would say mine's along the same lines, which is don't accept the status quo. Change doesn't happen if we remain stagnant and if we believe the societal or the social constructs which have been fed to us. So don't accept the status quo and continue to advocate for yourselves.
Yeah. And I would say that despite the challenges, it's also a massive life transition that brings with it huge opportunities to relook at how am I living my life? Who am I becoming? Who do I want to be? And your brains do literally upgrade post-menopause, and you get to be this wiser woman with more grey matter, and you can be as feisty and disagreeable as you like, which is really quite fun.
Looking forward to that, Clarissa.
Love
Oh, wonderful. And just to sum it up, I think, I've just been taking some notes and just some amazing insight that you've all shared. And thank you so much. And, some of the key things that I'm definitely taking away is things, keeping a record of your symptoms. I thought that was a brilliant one. Advocating and speaking up, if your doctor's not listening, change your doctor. And I think, Amanda, you said it so well that it's your right to do that. But again, it's also that evidence-based information I think is so, so important. And, taking time to listen to our bodies, I think these are some amazing, amazing insights. And, I really want to thank all of you for your insight today and for just your honesty and sharing your lived experiences. I know sometimes it can be quite difficult to talk about things that are very personal to us, but, I know that be people that would have listened to this and would have, been helped by us sharing our stories and, talking from experience and what we've all gone through. And it's not easy, right? We're all trying to figure it out. We're all trying to find a way to navigate through this. But the more of us that are speaking out and coming together, and, for anyone who's out there, there's some amazing great people to follow on social media. There's a great organization that's called Menopause Matters on Instagram. I follow them. I find some amazing insight from them. I'm sure there's loads of others. But we've got amazing people here who've got brilliant podcasts. Period to Pause is a fantastic one. Jay, I think you mentioned your podcast. Do you mind just saying it again?
The Gender Reveal Party podcast.
Thank you very much. Clarissa, I think you also do a podcast.
I do. Thriving Through Menopause.
Thriving Through Menopause, and our podcast, which is You Can't Say Anything Anymore. So there's so much resource out there. We're all here to support and to share our knowledge. So just to say, please keep the conversation going. Let's continue to raise awareness. Let's continue to challenge the status quo, as Amanda rightly put towards the end there. And I think the more of us that are talking about it, we will see that change, and we will see that needle move. But just leaves me to say thank you all for joining us today from wherever you are in the world, where you've been tuning in from. Just really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. And hopefully you've gained something. So wonderful to have you with us today. And thank you so much from all of us on the panel. I'd love to say a big wave and a big thank you.
Thank you.
And the podcast will still be available to download on all the different platforms that we've mentioned. So this will still be available should you want to share it with friends and family and colleagues. Have a wonderful day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.